bit about Altis. What was it like working there?
Still the best job I've ever had. It
Not
was
surprised.
really challenging in the sense that every day we'd have a meeting with the group and we'd sit down and go, all right, these are the sessions that are on today. Our performance therapy team would have a little side meeting and we're like, all right, these are the athletes that are in sort of orange or red status, rest in the green, but these are the check-ins. And that pressure was just amazing. It was supported pressure. So it wasn't
right.
like,
That was
if
going
you
to
don't,
be. Yep.
if you don't do this, then you're out. It was like, this is what we have to do. This is the important stuff. And I think that you can do it. And if you have any problems, let me know if you've got any questions. That's kind of how it started. But soon after that, I mean, I'll talk a bit about the model itself because I think it's important to sort of go through that because
100%.
I was in a very different context. I just come back, from working at the AIS where I had my cubicle, I had the athletes that I'd see, they'd book in, and that was great. I worked well in that environment, but I wasn't at the track, and it certainly wasn't as involved as I was about to be in. So they coined this process of the performance trinity, and basically it's just, like you said before, with the communication that you're trying to establish at Geelong, they have a very, very explicit system in place where the athlete, the coach, and the therapist all have an incredibly tight relationship.
Oh, beautiful.
And a great example of that is just the day-to-day. So I told you about that meeting we'd have in the morning where everyone would be there, even the interns that are coming in, setting up little hurdles and wickets and cones. So everyone would be there for the session, the intentions of the sessions. You'd have like 3 or 4 different groups going off. You'd have your hurdles, your sprints, your throws at the time, and jumps. And then when we got to the track, it was all systems go. We'd be there at least half an hour before the athletes got there to set up. And even though I was a therapist and I was, I guess, higher in the rank than an intern, I was still there. Everyone's setting up cones, everyone's sort of
gold
part of that process. And athletes would get there, you'd have a check-in and a quick conversation, and we'd have 3 or 4 tables at the track every single day. And the process would be athletes would turn up, coach or therapist would have a quick conversation. There might be some follow-ups from the day before. And there might be another conversation with the coach if there was some new information coming in or something that needed to be discussed about the session itself. Most of the time, they'd have a check-in on the table. So I would do, probably a 2-minute assessment, and I might sort of see some things that I wanted to correct or improve. I might not. And that might happen after like the jog and a couple of elements of the warm-up as well. But almost all the athletes would get some time checking in with not only the coach, but the therapist as well. And it was great. So I might have an athlete that's halfway through the warm-up, and Stu or me or Dan would see an anomaly in their movement pattern, this is where the gold is, because this is where I'd never seen this before. You've got potentially 2 or more sets of eyes on one athlete. Their profile, their movement pattern really well. Their history of injuries, of what they're dealing with. And any small aberration in what is normal for them, we'd have a small assessment of like, okay, is that acceptable? Is that not? If it isn't, let's get them on the table. And Stu would say, Beej, you've got 8 minutes. So and it was very specific because we knew that if it was longer than that 8 to 10 minutes, we'd start to affect their central nervous system. Autonomics would start to change. And they'd start to be able to, they'd probably start to affect the quality of the session itself just by them lying down on a table and getting treatment. And I love that. I had a problem. I had an outcome that I wanted. I had the skill set that I had the communication with the athlete. The athlete, I mean, the great thing was the athletes knew all of this inside out, especially the more experienced ones. So they knew this system really, really well. They knew that they weren't going to get a massage. They were going to get some treatment, usually ART or something sort of more fast-paced, moving athletes, always moving on the table. And they get back out there. And that might repeat, if you had someone that was showing some patterns that weren't changing with the small amount we were giving, you might do that 3 or 4 times in a session. It would definitely affect the session, but that's you wanted to make sure. Now, I'll give you an example of where I saw this, which just blew my mind. So at the time, there was an athlete there, Aries Merritt, who is and was Olympic champion and world record holder in the 110 hurdles. So not a bad athlete to be
good credentials, mate.
Exactly. And
can move.
I think it was my 2nd or 3rd week, and I saw him pull up in a rep. And I was like, oh shit, Aries has gone down, you know?
Yep.
And I had my Australian sort of what that looks like in my Australian sort of context at the RAS. And I played that out. I'm like, all right, he's hurt. Let's get the ice on. Let's get him back down to the sports medical center. Let's book him in for the next week or so of treatments. Let's just shut this down. And he got on the table, but he got on the table at the track straight away with his therapist. It wasn't me at the time. It was a chiropractor, Jazz, and he was incredible. And he had about probably 40 minutes of treatment. Obviously, the session wasn't going to be the same. I'm not saying it went back out there into the session, but he got 40 minutes or so of treatment, constantly getting on and off the table. And then I saw him doing a session. He was doing dribbles. So he was supposed to do a speed workout.
Yeah.
He got therapy to the point where he was not in any pain anymore.
Yep.
But the idea was to potentially squeeze a little bit out of that day, potentially get something from a motor patterning point of view out of the session, and know that if he did go back down to the sports medical and he had that mindset of, I'm hurt.
Yep.
I'm going back down to sport. I've been sent back to the doghouse because I'm hurt.
Yep.
He gets to do a session after he's had this hamstring, probably a 0.5 or a grade 1 or whatever it was.
Yep.
But no imaging. We had someone who knew the athlete really well, did some therapy. He got back out there. And I mean, he was a bit of a Wolverine as far as his ability to heal. It was incredible what I saw from him. Going from, even a grade 2, he was back within 4 weeks sort of thing.
Wow, shit, really?
Unbelievable.
You don't often hear that.
But just getting into this mindset that was completely different to what I was used to, was just an absolute game changer. So I absolutely loved it. I learned so much, and it was a unique environment for so many reasons. They had no funding from external environment, so there was no like government funding. There was
no Australian Sports Commission,
no sponsorships at the time even.
Yep.
So they could do whatever they wanted, and they had, I mean, I reckon they would have had about 160 years of coaching experience between them in this.
Wow.
And we're talking like probably in the 60s or 70s of Olympic medalists and world champions and that sort of thing. Like, the coaching knowledge was just phenomenal. So they knew that they were going to be potentially held back by some of these, government funding sort of models that would give them all this red tape to go through. And they're like, well, look, we think we can do a better job without that,
Yeah.
And it had its own problems. I think they kind of grew too fast for a little bit, and they didn't have some of the business structure to be able to maintain it. So they pulled back a little bit after a time, but nothing to do with the fact that we were doing incredible work in the environment. It was more just, a business being run by coaches, which doesn't tend to work very well.
No, of course not. No, because there's, like you said, there's so many other factors that can, push it offline, or it just collapses and implodes.
Yeah. But no, but so very, very short story long, that was my experience over there.
Yeah, no, it's
fantastic. Completely changed the way that I thought about training, therapy, mechanics, just everything. So I was just, blown away. And that sort of really gave me that next level of knowledge. And all right, what else is there out there? Because I knew that, like, all the stuff that I'd learned as an athlete and as a therapist in Australia, it got me to a certain point and it was fantastic. But I just realized that there's all these other people doing phenomenal things that are very different, and not necessarily better or worse, just different. So I was able to go, all right, well, there's some really good elements from the Australian system and the model. There's some really good elements from the US system. Well, it wasn't even the US system, because it was, I think there was 30 countries represented.
I was going to say it would have been very intercontinental,
very multicultural, very, very intercontinental. There was, massive diversity in the athletes and the coaches and therapists even. So, it was really, really just very special time.
I remember, you don't have to win me over, mate. I'm loving it. But I remember when you came back over with Dan and you set up that series of lectures and stuff, and I remember sitting there listening to him and just thinking, oh my God, this is music to my ears. I mean, like, everything that he was talking about, everything that they were doing, how they were looking at their athletes, how they were videoing them, how they were, integrating with them and speaking to everyone else, and had this, he's the athlete in the middle and all these people are putting into them and they're all communicating, and I'm like losing my shit. Because, this is what I was like when I was at the Cats, was like, that's what I wanted to try and create, some sort of level of that, especially from a high performance point of view, or having a high performance manager. Do you know what I mean? But Yeah, listening to him speak and the way he was going about, I'm going, oh man, this is just gold. This, and like I said before, it shouldn't be the gold standard. It should be the standard. Do you know what I mean? When you're working, especially when you're working with, elite high performance athletes. I mean, that's, you're mad if you're not ticking all those boxes. And if you've got the environment, you can create it, and you've got the money, and all that sort of stuff fits together. Man, that's gold. I mean, it's not work, is it?
That's right. Yeah, exactly right.
I mean, you get excited about going to work.
Yeah. It's like, what's on today?
Yeah.
And in a kind of nervous way as well. I'm like,
Yeah.
how do I have to be better today than I was yesterday to serve all the athletes the best way I can?
Yeah.